the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
PBS, this just in. An entire battalion of weaponized misogynists will be descending on hapless Chicago to forcefully fondle the city's innocence. With them are notorious fascist pug handler Count Dankula, rape joke enabler Sargon of Akkad, alt-right menace Mr. Reagan, Satan himself Paul Elam, and the devil's handmaid Karen Swan. We have just received word from an expert in hateology that if you even so much as look upon this conference, your eyes will be burned out of your skull, your tongue will invert, and your anus will seethe from the union. We repeat, do not so much as glance at this convention and its related paraphernalia of evil.
This is HBR News number 218, Double O Wammen, Antifa Revolutionaries, and Poor Teacher Imprisoned, where we reflect on the stories of the week and give it the Badger treatment. Uhuru, y'all, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. I am your host, Brian, and I am joined by, as always, my esteemed co-panelists, Hannah and the two Mikes. We have a great show lined up for you guys today, so please be sure to continue the conversations both in the chat as well as the comment section. On this week's HBR News Show, we're going to be talking about the honks of the week, including the story of an Antifa terrorist that attempted to attack an ICE facility, a man who attempted to bomb a court, a teacher who got 20 years for her affair with a student, and more. It sounds like backwards world in a way, I guess. So stick around. It's going to be a good time. And be sure to join us afterwards for the patron-only after show. In May, the official Twitter account for the Academy... Well, that's not right. I have this story here from The Independent. And this is actually a segment from that. So in May, the official Twitter account for the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, home of the Oscars, asked its followers to name the one movie they felt needed to be seen in a cinema. One Twitter user suggested Alita Battle Angel, James Cameron's passion project from earlier this year, although, you know, we all know he's been talking about this movie for like 10 years. About an amnesiac robot girl who awakens in a poverty-ravaged future world and slowly rediscovers her inner and outer strength. No, this is not Captain Marvel. That basically has the same plot. This is the other movie that people actually liked. So we're going to be looking at this article from The Independent entitled The Cult of Alita Battle Angel, Alt-Right Parable or Neglected Classic. This is the reason why this is an archive link, folks. I'm not trying to give The Independent that fucking click. So I know this is a bit late. I know that people had been talking about this story, you know, for a little while, but I just now kind of came around to it, and I also started watching Alita Battle Angel. So I haven't finished it yet, but I can probably like speak to the article more now that I've seen at least half of the film. So if you want to be a part of that, you got to become a Badger by going to feedthebadger.com. That'll get you into the Discord, and you'll be able to watch or participate in the after shows depending on the level of patronage that you give us. So
you can find out why Brian didn't make it all the way through the movie, even though it's just a movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just haven't finished it. I don't.
Just don't tell him. Save it for the after show.
We'll save it for the after show.
Ladies and gentlemen, find out what Brian thinks.
That's right. I'll save it for the after show. Let's just say I haven't finished it yet. So go to feedthebadger.com to set up a monthly subscription. And while you're at it, go to feedthebadger.com and see if you can't help us out. The fundraiser is at 85% of its goal. So, you know, if you want to throw a couple of shekels in the old hat there and help us make this ICMI the bestest ICMI ever, which I think it's on track for being already, but you know, you guys can really drive it home. So go to feedthebadger.com and support the ICMI fundraiser. In addition, tickets are still available for ICMI. And they, you know, there's still a great deal of excitement if you can come down, but there's also other ways that you can buy tickets. You can even watch it from home by buying a special sort of virtual ticket. So go to the Feed the Badger. Also go to icmi.info so you can get more information about that. So with all of that out of the way, I thought we would jump into the stories, and we're going to start with a story about a certain Antifa revolutionary, as an Antifa hero. May he rest in power. Mike J, if you could.
I certainly can, Doge. Around 4 a.m. on the morning of July 13th in Tacoma, Washington, a man attacked a facility run by the U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known as ICE. The man, later identified as William Van Spronson, wielded a rifle as he threw incendiary objects at the facility and vehicles in the nearby parking lot, eventually managing to set one vehicle completely on fire. Van Spronson also attempted to ignite a propane tank in order to set the facility on fire, but was, thankfully, unsuccessful. Tacoma police officers arrived on the scene and located Van Spronson, who was then shot by the police officers. Van Spronson was later declared deceased at the scene. Van Spronson's immediate motives were soon uncovered, though. In 2018, Van Spronson was arrested during a protest of an ICE facility where he assaulted a cop attempting to arrest another protester. Deb Bartley, a friend of Van Spronson for over 20 years, stated, quote, "He was ready to end it. I think this was suicide. But then he was able to kind of do it in a way that spoke to his political beliefs. I know he went down there knowing he was going to die." End quote. Van Spronson also sent a 3-page manifesto out to several friends just days before his death. The manifesto makes his motives crystal clear. In it, he states his affiliation with Antifa, his willingness to fight the fascists, and his hope that his actions would start the revolution.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on this story?
I get the feeling they're gonna, like, the left is gonna make less of a big deal over this guy than they did over the New Zealand guy, because even the mainstream media, like, they had a story put together within the same day of the New Zealand article, the New Zealand incident. But I half expected not to see any coverage of it at all. Sort of surprised to even see it's here. But yeah, and you'll notice the reaction to the New Zealand thing was from all sides. Yeah, this is bad. Don't ever do this again. If you want the layman's language or whatever, it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
But even in the event of this thing happening, there's people coming out of the woodwork saying, "Good on you, son."
Well, they've martyrized this guy.
A little bit, yeah.
Good old Talcum X has come out in full support of this.
Oh, absolutely. He actually said that this needs to happen at a greater scale, like, and by any means necessary, I believe were the words he used.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Parroting the name of the organization right here, based in good old Berkeley, California. BAM, by any means necessary.
That's right.
Well, and
the same group that bike locked that one guy and who hosts the Screaming Harpy, Yvette or Yvonne, I forget
Yvette,
what name she has now.
Yvette Falarca. Yeah,
it's both. I have seen both. She changed her name at some point. I don't know which one is the old one and which one's the new one.
Guess according to the Daily Caller, he repeated Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's concentration camp language. She's the one that actually, yeah, she's sort of the one that kind of coined calling them that, if I remember right. And she's been the loudest one calling them that. And sure. If she didn't coin it, and she's been criticized for calling them that by groups who were affected by the Holocaust. People who were in concentration camps and people whose friends and family members died in concentration camps came out to say, stop making the comparison because that's baloney. When they go into the showers, they're just showers. And
there's no element of forced work. There's no element of torture. They're not carrying out inhumane science experiments on these people. They're getting medical treatment, for the love of God.
They're not even keeping them indefinitely. They're releasing them into the public after a period of time. Like, well, here, you've been here long enough. Here you go. We've investigated. This is definitely your child, and you didn't kidnap the child to get here. Here you go. And
if you
there are people who have, right? So there are children who have arrived in the United States in the company of kidnappers who have stolen them from their parents and used them to get across the border. And these people are upset that those kidnappers are being separated from those children and they're exploiting the circumstance of parents who also have to be investigated because they didn't bring identification, and their fear that they're not going to be reunited with their children because they don't have identification proving that they are their children. And then they set off somebody like this. This is the side of the political fence that says language is violent, and that when someone engages in violence, echoing the language of a political group or a political speaker, that political speaker is at fault, that they inspired it, that they set it off. Well, guess what? This guy did this because of what Ocasio-Cortez and other people like her, people who are so far left that they want to get rid of the border, people who are so far left that anything the right does, they oppose it. If the right was trying to open the borders, these people would be trying to close them. You know, that they are out and out inspiring violence. And you have Antifa members hitting people with trench clubs. You have them attacking journalists, have them mobbing entire cities, doing significant amounts of property damage, threatening people online and getting away with it. And now somebody has actually attacked law enforcement, border enforcement. The idea that he's starting the revolution? No, we're in a civil war. It's mostly a cold civil war. Antifa is attempting to make it an overall hot civil war.
Oh, and the media wants that civil war to happen too. Well, a lot of people on the left want it to happen.
Like, think of the cover. Think of the ad revenue. Think of the eyes that are going to be glued to the TV if this shit actually starts popping off. They're going to be popping the champagne at these companies, man.
Go ahead, Mike.
There's a point I was going to make halfway through Hannah's speech. What happens when you trespass on someone's private property? Where do you get detained? It's a police station, isn't it? And a police cell if necessary. What happens if
you don't get your ass shot first?
Yeah, exactly. What happens if you trespass on someone's private property with your child in tow? Same thing, and you'll get separated from that child. If the punishment for trespassing on US government property is not as bad as the punishment for trespassing on private property, then you're doing pretty well, I'd say.
Yeah, in fact, if you actually were to go and look at these facilities, they have schools where the kids are learning in their own language, and some of them are learning English. They're receiving, like Brian said, they're receiving medical treatment. They have playgrounds, they have play equipment inside the schools, toys, and so on. And they have, there's been significant amounts of clothing and other comfort items donated for them. And, even it's not even just the government supplying things. The ICE workers, they're actually, ICE agents are bringing toys from their own homes for these kids. So this isn't a situation that is anything like any of the Democrats are describing it. And it's pure propaganda when they do this. In fact, they circulated pictures from the Obama era and tried to use them to condemn Trump. Right? They circulated pictures of fenced-in areas and called them cages. And they circulated, there's dividers between this is where you stay when you get here before you go into the actual facility. They circulated those and actually told people that was where people were being kept, and people were not being kept in there long term. People were sitting in there waiting to be processed. So they're not, and they have places to sit down and lay down in that area while they're waiting to be the next person to speak to an ICE agent and get processed and go into the rest of the facility where they get medical treatment and education and anything else that is deemed, basically necessary to take care of a person. And many of them are getting released into the United States. Any of them that come in as a family and is confirmed to be a family, they all get released into the United States. There's a court ruling that forces that. That's also, if I remember right, an Obama era thing that they had determined they were going to be handling families a particular way, and the court said, no, you're keeping them away from their families too long, so you have to release them, because you can't incarcerate the kids with their parents, and you can't incarcerate the parents without their kids, even though they've illegally entered the country, when they could have gone through a legal point to come in, so they just let them go, and they set them up for a immigration hearing, and many of them never show up. None of these problems are acknowledged, and here we have this violent individual who was, if he was already suicidal, there was already something wrong, and he already had a disconnect from reality or from humanity, or
Both.
some other issue in his life, right?
Manifesto. It's very clear this guy had some sort of mental illness.
And the people around him, instead of getting him help, they exploited him with propaganda about this particular issue, to the degree that he felt comfortable sacrificing himself for it. And what he did was reprehensible. What he did was terrible. And nobody should do anything even remotely like this. But would he have done it if he was sane? Would he have done it if he was okay? Would he have done it if the people around him gave a shit about him, instead of pushing him further and further down the path of crazy?
Mm-hmm. I chose this story because there was some interesting facet of it that I wanted to bring up, and I just gotta make a couple of statements before I do. Obviously, I'm not trying. I didn't want to talk about this story originally because a lot of other people had already talked about it, and I didn't think it was entirely relevant to men's issues. It's related in the larger culture war, obviously, because what we are looking at is it's like that men's issues is is one of the core problems this is all sort of stemming from, but this is another symptom of what is, like, at least in my mind, what is likely the larger issue. But
Karen started using the term men's right adjacent, which sort of makes sense, because people are talking about the left-right thing, so they don't have to talk about the men-women thing. It's talking about the black-white thing, so they don't have to talk about the men-women thing.
Yes, exactly. That's what I've been saying. And I didn't really originally want to talk about it because most people are talking about this in a left-right thing, Antifa versus everybody else thing, and all those things are true. And I thought this was a terrible thing that happened. I thought this guy was clearly, radicalized, and like you guys had said, he's probably got a history of mental illness, or it seems like it's certain. And this is basically what it takes, like all these Antifa people. It just takes one nut job to do, something terrible. And you can look at New Zealand as another example of that. Whether you think that that's on the other side or whatever is irrelevant. The point is that all of this results in these kind of acts of self-destructive, I guess you could just call it evil, for lack of a better word. And just like the New Zealand guy, and just like some of the other, big shootings and stuff, I was trying to figure out what caused him to do this. Like, what kind of state would you have to be in? And again, I'm not trying to make him to a martyr. I'm not asking anybody to sympathize with this person or make them, humanize him too much. But I think it helps understand. So originally I wasn't going to talk about it. And then Dion McNeil, who I've had on the show a couple times, his YouTube persona is known as Devil's Advocate. He sent me a link to a couple of other things that in his mind, could shed some light that I thought I would share because I found it interesting. So in his manifesto, Vance Bronson mentioned having a broken heart as a father, Court documents and an online fundraising campaign, which I will show you guys. There was a GoFundMe for this guy. Started by his daughter, show that he had been going through a bitter divorce and custody battle since 2013. Vance Bronson had been accused of domestic violence by his ex-wife and had been limited in the amount he was allowed to see his young son, his adult daughter wrote. So his adult daughter did this on his behalf, okay? In March of this year, this is his daughter talking, my dad's wife, Shelley, left him and accused him of domestic violence. I can't imagine what prompted Shelley to take such dramatic action, but Will, that's the name of this guy, Will Vance Bronson, but Will has never ever been threatening or violent in the entire time that I've been alive. Unfortunately, in the state of Washington, hearsay evidence is enough to have orders placed against anyone regardless of evidence to the contrary, Ariel Vance Bronson wrote on her Indiegogo page. Or this Indiegogo page. This accusation has prevented Will from being able to see his son Boots, yes, that's his son's name, more than 4 supervised hours per week. Boots needs the love and care of both of his parents. This is a balance that is very important. Will has tried up to this point to defend himself because he is unable to afford an attorney. During the divorce case, Vance Bronson's estranged wife received a domestic violence protection order against him 4 times. These 4 orders were issued after the hearings. The protective orders were issued in 2013, 2014, 2016, and February of this year, 2019.
Was any of this mentioned in his manifesto?
Yes, to some degree. There, I think there's mention of yes,
it's
him
about
having
one line.
Yeah, there's about a line in there about this. And so I'm not saying that this is the reason why this happened. I'm saying that because I can only speculate, right? We don't know. But I think it's a very interesting piece of his backstory that could, like when you're alienated from your kids, or if you're a child and you're alienated from your family or your parents, there are several negative effects. This is something I learned from speaking with the woman whose name slips my mind right now. She ran the Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo Foundation. I met her in Australia when I went to the ICMI a couple of years ago. And she headed this organization up in Australia. And she talked about how it creates feelings of helplessness, of nihilism, extreme cases of nihilism with parents, and the depression and all kinds of other psychological issues can come out of it. Now, again, for all I know, Will was already prone to this. He likely has his own history of abuse. He's clearly still in Antifa, so there's got to be a degree of nihilism that already exists. But I think that when you think about whatever other issues he may have, this particular sliver about his life, I think it should be, at least for me, it's somewhat revealing. I think that these things don't happen in a vacuum, and I don't know. I just think that there's something to it, and this is why I'm bringing it up. So I would leave it to you guys that are watching what your thoughts are on this. But I think that this is definitely something that makes this story worthwhile, and more importantly, it's something that no one else is really talking about.
A couple of things to point out. First of all, it really strongly contributes to a person's mental state when they go through a trauma like that. And being separated from your child permanently is traumatic. Being separated from your child temporarily is rough. It's very rough. It can be very traumatic, especially I don't like the way things are handled at the border in terms of families. I don't like that the court didn't come up with a better suggestion or a better idea than you have to let them go into the population. You can't incarcerate, you can't hold families together, and you can't hold them separately. But I don't like the idea of parents being separated from their children even for a short time. But for fathers, this is just a reality in the United States. It's still traumatic. And I know men who have post-traumatic stress disorder from the process that this guy went through. I know men that have post-traumatic stress disorder from being arrested and at all hours of the day and night repeatedly because their exes were using false allegations of domestic violence and sometimes sexual violence as leverage in divorce cases and custody battles and property battles. And this is not limited to Washington State. I've seen it happen in multiple counties in Ohio. I've seen it happen in other states, not firsthand, but from the stories of men from other states who have echoed exactly what happened to the men I know personally that this happened to. And it is horribly traumatic. Probably the most important thing in a parent's life, in a parent's world, is the welfare of their children. And when you have no ability to protect your child, especially like mothers are protective, in their way, but fathers have an entirely different way of being protective, and not being able to be aware of what's being done to your child and what's being done for your child, and knowing that your child is being used as a weapon against you and is being alienated from you by a person who you used to love, but she hates you now, who you've seen lie and cheat and steal and manipulate the court system, and engage in essentially reprehensible behavior toward you. It's terrifying to think that your child is living in that situation, right? So in this guy's, not in his defense, but in his situation, I would absolutely say that this, even if he didn't say a lot about it, because a lot of guys have difficulty discussing this kind of thing, especially if they've been completely defeated by it. No guy wants to talk about being defeated. And, even women don't want to talk about being defeated, right? But I would absolutely say that this was a contributing factor to his mental state, and it would have made him more vulnerable to exploitation by political extremists.
I'd also add that being accused of domestic violence if you hadn't done anything, and that being the tool by which you lose access to your kids, but just the accusation itself also, I think it adds its own level of psychological and emotional abuse. It's just like being falsely accused of domestic violence when, especially when you would never do that to the person who's accusing you, is like being accused of rape, although like maybe less extreme or less severe, when you wouldn't rape anyone, because it. So I think that and that's a tool that she used to like take custody away from him. Now I will add one thing, because this is a bit of well, I mean, like what we're seeing here, there is an Indiegogo. The daughter put it together. We can't really confirm that what she's saying is true. If we go by this and we give it the benefit of the doubt, I think it can be like Hannah said, a contributing factor to his mental state, and but that doesn't mean that he didn't already hold these kind of ideological views in the first place. But maybe he wouldn't have been so, like, say, self-destructive in the way that he decided to carry out, that this would contribute to that aspect, right? Like, there are plenty of hardcore leftist Antifa that probably have families, and or they're married and they're not in danger of divorce, so they just hold the views, or they at least tacitly support, but they don't go out and put themselves at legal risk because they have something to live for. But when they don't, then maybe there is more cause for them to just say fuck it, right?
What do we know about this guy's health?
We don't.
If it turns out he has some kind of terminal, or he had some kind of terminal condition in which he knew he was going to die, because those the comments of whoever it was, and they said he knew he was going to die, was sort of.
I think they were saying that he was suicidal.
Yeah, he was planning to die down there. He knew he was going to be shot and killed by the cop.
But
he was in his mid-60s, so he was quite old.
The things people do under the influence of mental illness, if you want to call it that, are not the same as the things people do under the influence of knowing they're going to die. This is where it gets quite complicated, because if you knew you were going to die like in a week's time, you'd act very strange for the next week, but it wouldn't be, it would be perfectly rational, because if you know you're going to die, then you're going to sort of focus your your attention on something important to you, or even it's sort of connected with the way old pharaohs wanted massive pyramids built so that people would remember them, and sort of old Antifa guys who know they're going to die sort of make that big last push to be remembered. And that's not necessarily the result of mental illness. It's just the result of wanting to be remembered. But that's not saying that this guy had a clean bill of health. He probably didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. We don't know a whole lot about him, but that's also possible.
Like whenever we hear about mass shooting, and we think, well, what does that have to do with mental illness? And you think, well, if someone shot up a bunch of people, if someone became a mass shooter, that in itself is evidence that they're mentally ill. But that's what I'm saying. Not necessarily. If you know you're going to die, it's not mental illness that's doing it. It's what you've decided to do, knowing that you're going to die. You know.
Right, but there wasn't anything said that would indicate that this guy was in poor health. The knowing he was going to die was he was suicidal. He knew he was going to die. He knew that he would get killed doing what he was doing. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he was going to die if he didn't do it.
Well, he just wanted. I guess he wanted to go out doing something great. So he was trying to be remembered, right, as doing something great, and that's the cause that he thought would do that. And one more thing I want to add, and then we can close out this story, is that his daughter says that he was the kind of person who would never hurt anyone, but we know that's not true because he has a prior for attacking a cop, right? Wasn't he assaulted a cop, right? Yeah. Back in 2018.
A cop who was trying to arrest another protester.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like he didn't have the capacity for violence, but it's, I wouldn't say it's completely contradictory, because it may be the case that he would never hurt his family, but, he still, strong member of Antifa, full on communist. So he felt like these people, the police, were literally the enemy. And maybe in his own way, he thought he was protecting his family from them.
Exactly. When he engaged in that prior assault, was that might have been one of the early signs of his radicalization, because that wasn't a random thing. That was in defense of another Antifa member. If that was in defense of another Antifa member, he probably did treat it as a situation of defending a person who was being attacked, not attacking a person who was doing his job.
Right, and that was after he lost custody of his kid, by the way.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And according to him, though, he was actually radicalized, and this is, I gotta kind of smile when I read this because it sounds so nonsensical, but his words in the manifesto, I'll read the whole quote. Don't let your silly government agencies spend money investigating this one. I was radicalized in civics class at 13 when we were taught about the Electoral College.
Oh, for Pete's sake.
I have to take that with the same big grain of salt that I took the New Zealand guy's manifesto with. Maybe he's just saying that. Maybe
it does seem
insane.
like a
I don't know.
point.
Well, it sounds like something that at the time he wouldn't, at 13 he probably wouldn't have said, fuck the police,
I can't
and
wait
the
for
government,
50
and
more
I can't
years
wait for
where I can go to commit suicide by cop at an ICE detention facility.
But the talking points of Antifa and the progressive left on the Electoral College probably convinced him that what he learned in school about it, was radicalizing.
Especially if he grew up and went to school in Washington State. It's pretty bad up there. So, but
I don't know how it was 50 years ago.
I don't know either, but maybe it's always been like that. I don't know. Maybe there are some old people who live in Washington State that are watching that can clue us in. So anyway, with that said, the main thing is that I think it's interesting that this guy had this child custody and really messy divorce that was going on in his life. And I think that, is it just fucked up people having fucked up shit happen in their fucked up lives and then they try to fuck everybody else up? It could be as simple as that. It's kind of a George Carlin answer. But then there could be something more to it. What level of nihilism does it take to where you think that your own death is the best thing for the kids that you can't see? So let us know what you guys think in the comments regarding this story. And again, I'm not at all defending any of this person's actions. I am very much against Antifa, but at the same time, a part of me wants to understand why the sort of way in which men, because it's often men that are employed by Antifa, are used as weapons against their enemies, and how they are willing to go along with that. So part of me wants to understand
understanding a phenomenon like this is key to preventing it.
Yeah. And I think that it's broken men. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's not always broken men. Let me be clear. There's just straight up ideologues. I'm not going to make them into a victim class. But I think there are a lot of broken men or damaged men, purposeless men, that are in groups like Antifa, just as there are damaged men and broken men and confused men and purposeless men in groups like the alt-right, even if the alt-right is small. But I think that they suffer from a similar problem. So, okay. But anyway, moving on. Let us know what you guys think in the comments section. I move on to another story that's kind of similar. We're going to talk about a man named Michael Seabrook. But Brook with an E, though. So, 2 homemade bombs were detonated outside of the Pickens County Courthouse in Carrollton, Alabama last week. Michael Seabrook was arrested in connection with the bombs and told investigators he planted devices in the Pickens County Department of Social Services office as well. Federal investigators found Molotov cocktails on the roof of that office. Seabrook's brother's wife, not to make it too confusing, Jessica Raines, said that Seabrook changed after his ex-wife got sole custody of his children in 2008. Quote, "He was always the happy person in the group," Raines said. "Enjoyed going out and being around large groups of people. Then, like overnight, he stopped caring about his personal appearance, started being a hermit, and always talking about his kids, being deceased, and how he hated Pickens County. He felt that he was done wrong." Greenville News states the following. Quote, Raines said sometime around 2015, Seabrook began to believe that his children had been murdered and that their murders were covered up by his ex-wife and law enforcement in Pickens. Raines said Seabrook's children are safe and that her children video chat with them on a regular basis. In a 2017 post shared to a Facebook account, Raines confirmed as his in a Facebook account that Raines confirmed as his. Seabrook wrote that he'd set off a bomb in Pickens because he was upset that police wouldn't put out an Amber Alert on his 2 kids. Seabrook has a history of criminal charges, including burglary, one in 2003 and one in 2017, that were dismissed. At the time he was arrested, he was out on bond from an arrest on a criminal sexual conduct first-degree charge in Fairfield County. According to Greenville News, Seabrook was arrested in January of 2019 on the charge from an incident that occurred in 2016. The arrest alleged that Seabrook sexually assaulted a girl while on a camping trip. So, guys got a bit of a spotty history, but still, nonetheless, I thought an interesting story about a man who went off the deep end and tried to apparently attack a courthouse. So this is makes extremists of us all. What do you guys think?
Well, there's also there's a history of stories in which men have gone off the deep end because they have lost custody of their children, not just custody but contact with their children. Thomas Ball is one of the more disturbing in that he self-immolated in front of the courthouse and in front of his family. And
that's right. I was going to say that most of the time when this happens, if there's something like this, they just kill themselves. Yeah.
And you have Chris Mackney, who left it's a suicide note that will rip your heart out. And just Janet Bloomfield made a video. The video's name is Chris Macney. That she made a video reading it as if she was the mother, and it was her suicide note. And then she reveals that it's a father's suicide note, and discusses, if you're ready to have sympathy for this mother, you should have the same sympathy for this father. But after his suicide, when he was talked about in media, because his case was a higher profile case, there were some folks involved that were, I can't remember like whether it was they were involved in oil or whether they were stars, but there were people that were actually like movers and shakers in society. So it made news, and Feminist came out of the woodwork to call his suicide domestic violence against his wife, his ex-wife, a punishment basically directed at her for the crime of protecting her children from him, according to them. They had no compassion for this father at all, and no concern for the kids being separated from their father. And they didn't have any evidence that anything she said about him was true, but they were willing to dismiss everything that he said and believe everything that she said. And just basically for the sake of using this suicide as a bludgeon against fathers who have been separated from their children, rather than a reason to actually have some sympathy and consideration for estranged parents. And this is a pattern. Actually, oh God, I can't think of his name. That's really awful. Terrence Popp started his activism partly in response to, largely in fact, in response to the suicide of a friend of his. He was planning his own, and a friend's suicide can have a profound effect on you. It shows you what happens to everybody that's left behind after you check out, and what everybody goes through, what their family goes through, what their friends go through, what you go through as a friend. And it can be very convincing this is not the way to handle this situation. And he began making videos and doing a lot of discussion on the topic. So this is a really rough topic to talk about, because this has hit my family. This is not the suicide end of it, but the alienation end of it, and it's a very difficult thing to go through, and it's a very difficult thing to watch a father go through. But it's not surprising that this leads men to hit the point of destructive tendencies. It tears your heart out, it rips your soul, and it affects your mind. And there isn't any way to change that other than to change our system so that this isn't being done to parents.
So people are asking for a link to this Janet Bluefield video.
Okay, it's not Matfield, it's Macney, as in like the name Mac and NEY. But I will find the video real quick, and
yeah, it could be under.
I'll put it in our chat.
Is it possible that instead of under Janet Bloomfield, it's under Judgy Bitch? So I don't know how long ago this video is. So
let's see what her channel is. No, the channel is called Janet Bloomfield.
Okay.
So, and it's Chris Macney, Mackney. It only has 5,000 some views. I can't believe that. And I'll tweet out the link.
I got it right here as well. I'll put it in the comment section. There you go. So don't watch it right now though, because we're doing a live show. But definitely come back around to it. But yeah, I mean, look, this guy, he had a spotty history of arrests and everything. He's obviously no angel. Damaged goods in his own way. But what's interesting is that, if this is accurate, what they're saying here, this guy was relatively normal, if not a bit, Florida man, and then He just became a hermit and let himself go, and he thought that his kids were murdered. And I don't know if that's because he's just crazy and delusional, or if he actually believed it, or what. But yeah, it's just kind of a crazy little story that I thought I would share.
There may be all kinds of things to this story that we don't know about. Ex-wives can be really abusive, and they can really fuck with your head. Ex-husbands can too sometimes, but ex-wives can get away with it.
The upside, though, is he is still alive, so we actually still have a chance to find out what is going on with this guy, and hopefully he gets the help he needs.
Yeah, because he definitely needs it. All right, so let us know what you guys think about this story in the comments section, and I will move on to the next one. So we're going to revisit an old friend, because I'm pretty sure we did a story on this before. I'm pretty sure, because I know the name. I feel like I've read it out a couple times.
We have.
Yes, certainly have. Brittany Zamora. So the latest with this story, an update on a previously covered story. Brittany Zamora, who molested one of her 13-year-old students, has been sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to register as a sex offender. Zamora molested the 13-year-old boy at Las Brisas Academy, while an 11-year-old acted as a lookout. The parent of the 11-year-old said, quote, "Instead of teaching subjects like math and English, she showed them pictures and asked them about his private parts. She tried to groom my child into believing that this behavior was okay." As reported by Fox News, Zamora's attorney, Belen Olmedo Guerra, who I think is the woman here that's consoling her, provided a statement saying the 13-year-old boy was not necessarily a boy, but a teenager who was aggressive. Now, you got to be a cold-blooded lawyer to say that shit, but I guess, you got to defend your client? I don't know. Quote, Brittany Zamora implored Principal Dickey to move him because the teenager had boundary issues and was obsessed with Brittany. I am not making that up. I learned that from Principal Dickey, end quote. Yes. She is not a monster. Brittany is not a predator. And this was not between a young child and Brittany. This was a teenager, end quote. And last quote. As part of the plea agreement, 12 other criminal charges were dismissed, and Zamora avoided the maximum penalty of 40 years behind bars. Because of course she did.
I feel like I've got the modern day Sergeant Pepper coming on here. Principal Dickey is just so poetic. Something has to be done with it.
Yeah,
learned it from Principal Dickey.
Had a double take when I saw that myself.
Even if that argument was true, that the teenager had boundary issues, that he didn't know how to handle it. It's like 13-year-old boys do that. Some of them learn later than others to interact appropriately with people's boundaries, but they're still kids.
Yeah, but
they can't vote, they can't join the military, they can't get jobs, right?
Just because
if he were to become
issues.
a father, he couldn't. In fact, it actually makes him more vulnerable. Just like if he was intellectually disabled or had a mental health condition, it makes him more vulnerable if he has a failure to understand and recognize and respect boundaries. That is in a child, and a teenager is still a child. That is a vulnerability, not an indictment. And this is something that really pisses me off when it comes to people who argue for a right to exploit children sexually. That, this is not an argument they would make in any other case, right? But as soon as they can say a child wants something, they think that means that the child should automatically receive that. A 13-year-old can't drive because 13-year-olds aren't competent to safely handle a motor vehicle on a road with traffic. They may not even be competent to do so on in a closed environment, right? So young teenagers can't vote because they are not competent to make that decision. Young teenagers cannot decide
what if it's a little
where
kid
they're going to spend
really
the night.
What if it's a kid that's really precocious when it comes to cars, and they really love cars and transport, and they get into it from an early age, and they really know how cars work? And
who are we to hold that child
those
back?
things, yeah. Who are we to protect that child against the consequences of a wrong decision, right? That is exactly the argument that these people make, and it is wrong, right? The idea that people can get away with making these kind of arguments and not be considered monstrous people. Well, let's just throw them in, let them sink or swim in environments that are particularly complicated, in environments for which the consequences are profound and life-altering, and which can lead to another human life, for crying out loud. If a 13-year-old becomes a father, he can be obligated to pay the mother child support, but he can't get a job to pay that child support. He can be thrown into juvie for not being able to pay child support that he's ordered to pay. What kind of a system would we have if we decided, well, they can consent, but they still can't get a job, right?
Like if someone gave me booze when I was 8 years old, I would have absolutely consented, like overwhelmingly. But that wouldn't make it a good thing.
Yeah, the worst part
exactly.
about this is, I think, with female teachers seducing their students, is that I think that in general, people don't see the seduction part of it as a form of aggression. They see the response to seduction. So if the woman doesn't just go and grab guys by the junk, right, like her students by the junk, and instead she just like invites them, and like uses essentially like seduces them into touching her first, then it gives her plausible deniability. And I think that this is what the lawyer is using when she said, "Oh, they have boundary issues." Well, yeah, but if you invite them in a really subtle ways to touch you or look at you or talk to you a certain way or whatever, because you really want some of that 13-year-old bod, whatever, then that is on you. Like, it's crazy because the lawyer is essentially giving this woman less agency than a 13-year-old boy and an 11-year-old boy. There was an 11-year-old that was used as a lookout, I think. Is
and
what
was
they
exposed
said.
to numerous things.
Was exposed to things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Even if it was all at the kid's end from the beginning until almost right up to the incident, if you cannot handle that in a mature adult fashion with a focus on protecting the child and on helping the child to mature and learn to respect boundaries so that he doesn't get into trouble as an adult, rather than taking advantage of the situation or giving into the situation, you don't belong in the education system, not even as a janitor, much less a teacher. Nobody should be given a teaching certificate and think that it is licensed to fail to protect a child from his own flaws. That's just ridiculous. If you had a kid who had a handicap that put him in a wheelchair, and he had control of his wheelchair, and he decided he was going to wheel it down the stairs, you would stop him.
Yep.
If you have a child who doesn't have a visible handicap, but he has a disability in terms of understanding and recognizing boundaries and respecting boundaries, you don't let him wheel that down the stairs either.
Yeah, what we're alluding to is the very low % chance that this is what causes male rapists. Yeah.
Well, even
this
if
is
it
what
didn't,
causes male rapists in a very low % of cases.
it might be, and there's evidence that it is. But even if it didn't, the child is still harmed. So that's the point. You can't take advantage of a child's vulnerability and then use the vulnerability as an excuse for your actions. It is never okay to do that. It doesn't matter whether it's a kid in a wheelchair or a kid with boundary issues.
Yep. Xerinx just gave us a super chat and writes, Hannah's going to make me look like a bad guy in saying that 13-year-olds can be made competent depending on the subject. In the past, 13-year-olds used to start training for war. Sure, I mean, yeah.
Historical maturity and modern maturity is a false equivalence. In the past, people's life expectancy was much lower than it is because they lived harsh lives. And because they lived harsh lives, they faced dangers and death throughout their childhood. Yeah, they matured faster, but we don't live in that society. We live in a society, especially today, we live in a society where there are kids that have never climbed a tree because it's just too dangerous. You obtain maturity as you grow up by learning from mistakes, learning from consequences. And the fact that kids don't attain that level of maturity at 13 today, and they may not have attained that level of maturity in the past either. That may have been wrong in the past. In the past, when somebody committed certain crimes, they were killed by tying their limbs to 4 different horses and sending the horses off in 4 different directions to rip them apart. That was wrong. That was cruel and unusual punishment. Wasn't unusual back then, but it's cruel and unusual punishment. And there were numerous other forms. Things like stocks, being hung upside down, being whipped in public. These were all things that were normal back in that society. So the idea that because people used to do something, it was okay and it should be considered okay now is really irrational. It is not a logical argument, and it doesn't actually justify arguing that we should be able to do something today. Now, to condemn people in the past for living their normal, I think that's unproductive. I think it's, you don't judge people based on today's standards. You judge people based on the standards of the day and the environment that they were dealing with. But there are a lot of things that we have learned as a civilization and as a population that we have learned. This is, a really bad idea. We've gone overboard in some areas, but this isn't one of them.
Yeah, in the olden days, it was typical for people to lose their virginity at, say, 13. But what else was typical at 13 in the olden days? Marriage. It was typical to have sex at that early age in those days because people also got married at that early age in those days, and this is why they really had to push hard on the no sex before marriage rule, because they were mainly talking to teenagers. Because for most of history, that your teenage years were about a third of your entire life, and that was when you were looking for a partner, and someone had to teach you how to find the right kind of partner. Yeah. And nowadays we don't get married until 18 or whatever it is, and so we don't have sex until then either, because even though people have arguably become less mature over the last century, you have to work with what you've got. And if the sex before marriage thing no sex before marriage thing does sort of make sense, even in the age of contraception, because delayed gratification works, folks.
Mm-hmm.
In most walks of life. If you delay your gratification, then it'll last longer.
Okay, I got some super chats. Xerinx responded with another super chat. I don't think we should spend too much time responding to this because it's after 6 and we still have 2 more stories to get through. But he writes, actually, no, wait, we have 2 more. Yeah. He writes for $10, I think we underestimate children to their own detriment. There's work children there's work children that young can do that they're prevented from doing due to arbitrary laws that aren't life-threatening or dangerous. And then Mr. Roboto gives us $2 and says, adult woman assaults 13-year. Is she still D victim? Yes, she is. She may be a pedophile, but she's not a monster. I think I've heard that before.
I do want to respond to the child labor thing, though.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another thing that we have the luxury in our modern society of having no exposure to the horrors of what child labor became in the early 20th century. There were children who were mangled by machines, children who were mangled while conscious by machines. And there were children who worked 16 hours a day. There were children who were forced to support their families, and there were, to help support their families, and there were children who were locked into labor areas basically for the rest of their lives. That they start working in the coal mine, or they start working in a manufacturing area, or they start working in, as a janitor and cleaning and stuff like that, and they never get out of that. They don't get to finish their education. They don't get an opportunity to learn to do something else. They don't get an opportunity to better their lives. They're just stuck. They're essentially born into servitude. They're a step above indentured servants in that they don't have a contract, and in adulthood, if they choose to leave and try to educate themselves, that would be an incredibly hard road, and it's almost not a choice, but they still have some level of choice. But in terms of being able to obtain the tools that they would need to do better for themselves, it's taken away from them because they're stuck in a coal mine or a factory or the basement of some building with a mop and a mop bucket, exposed to essentially all kinds of hazards, because this was before work safety was a consideration, possibly killed during childhood on the job. No, it's not a detriment to prevent children from having jobs at that age. It's actually an improvement that we are now capable as a nation, as a civilization, of providing families with the luxury of allowing their children to finish a basic education, and the decision whether to go on to a post-secondary education. I don't think people realize how valuable that is. Most jobs here in the United States, you can't get them without a high school diploma or a GED, even if it's a crappy janitor job at a facility that nobody uses. I couldn't have gotten a job as a gas station attendant without a diploma or a GED. The idea that this is something that we should go back to is insane. And that's not saying that kids shouldn't learn their family business, and kids shouldn't be allowed to train with their parents, who are invested in their welfare and who are not going to just force them into servitude and prevent them from maturing and prevent them from learning and going on with their lives. Our civilization, our nation, puts children in a position where they can do that. They can treat their family like an apprenticeship. And they can learn a lot of other things. You can even go to a trade version of your high school. I knew kids that learned welding when they were in high school. So, and they were engaging in labor, but it was not 16 hours a day, and it wasn't an exploitative situation. It was for them to be able to train something to do something they were interested in. So this idea that we should go back to the way we took care of or took advantage of our families during previous centuries, that's really a bad argument in defense of behaviors towards kids today.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let me see if there's any other super chats. I saw one from Charles. Egregious Charles gives us $5. Thank you, Charles, and says, important to ask whether the family, including the child, will starve without the child labor.
Well, not in today's society, because in today's society,
not in the West, anyways.
Yeah, we have a network of, besides government assistance, we have a network of charities that would prevent that.
Nonetheless, that was a little bit of a side topic.
Plus, we have robots now. Like once upon a time, children were good at fitting through like very small mine shafts, but now we're really good at robots.
How long
the
ago?
first jobs they replaced were the child labor jobs, and arguably that's a good thing.
Yeah, that I'll take it. How long ago did we start calling young male children boys? Or, you know, and like just specifically, I wonder if there's a lineup between the child labor when we were using it, you know, and like that sort of way that we named our young male children. I wonder.
Yeah, it seems that like the slaves were called boys, and loads and loads of parents thought, "Hey, that sounds like a really cool thing to call your son."
Apparently,
that's what I can't get my head around.
Well, I mean, like, you know, well, I don't know the data on it, but maybe we can revisit this sometime. But I wonder how many young boys were the ones that were mostly getting crushed in machinery and shit like that. French Honey Badger gives us $10 and says, child labor was a standard for all humanity up until industrialization. They were no more, no less hurt before and after. Legal barriers shouldn't exist. Doesn't mean it automatically goes back to it. Okay, well, let's move on. I don't want to get into this ANCAP discussion right now. So, Andrew Cuomo, say it with me. I deserve this. I deserve it. Andrew Cuomo, New York governor, signs equal pay law during USWNT parade. The U.S. women's national soccer team, you may have heard a little bit about them. I know for my part, I never heard of them before this, like, last week, but... So, the U.S. women's national soccer team was in New York City on Wednesday to celebrate their World Cup win. Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, was in attendance. He signed legislation during the parade, he virtue signaled during the parade, to, quote, prohibit unequal pay on the basis of a protected class for all substantially similar work, end quote. The law would also prohibit employers for asking about a prospective employee's salary history. He tweeted that, quote, I just signed a new pay equity legislation at the USWNT parade. The women's soccer team plays the same game that the men's soccer players do, only better. If anything, the men should get paid less. Thank you at USWNT for helping lead this movement for change, end quote. The members of the team have filed a suit against the United States Soccer Federation, alleging that they are paid less than their male counterparts despite having the same job responsibilities. During the parade, Cuomo said that, quote, these are women's soccer players. They play the same game as the men's soccer players, and they lose to 15-year-olds, and they play it better. So if there's any economic rationale, the men should get paid less than the women. New York will continue to lead the way forward and stand in solidarity with women and girls in every corner of this state. Well, it's really easy to be a politician, I swear. By signing this legislation, we are not only doing the right thing, we are also doing the moral thing, and equal pay for equal work is now the law in the state of New York, end quote.
They do not have the same job responsibilities.
Congratulations, New York.
A female striker, if she misses some kind of ball, is not going to have a billion people yelling, you suck! You shouldn't get paid this much. Fuck off, you cunt. Because people watch women's sports far more casually than they watch men's sports, because there's less on the line.
Yeah, there's also not a million people watching that game. Maybe like 10,000. But this is not really in response to the women's soccer thing at all specifically, because we talked about that last week. But this is more about Andrew Cuomo supposedly passing or signing some new legislation that, you know, supposedly makes pay equal. Like, it has been illegal to pay different genders different, like it's been illegal to underpay women since like the 1960s, and even
1963.
then, yeah,
that's what I was going to point out. Congratulations, New York, on plagiarizing federal law.
Yeah,
great. You're a copy machine now. New York is now a state copy machine. They have copied federal law, as if federal law doesn't apply, right? Yeah, no, 1963. Since 1963, it's been illegal to do what this law forbids. So it's completely meaningless. It's just virtue signaling.
It is. It's virtue signaling. Literally, like legislative virtue signaling and pandering to women.
And why don't they do this in Hollywood? It's something like 90% of the biggest box office
they've tried.
Actors.
They've tried.
But because the people like trying to push this story are in the same sort of ideological fold as Hollywood itself, they're going to go, well, it's because of popularity. I don't know what it is.
Well, they shouldn't have this problem in Hollywood. They have a union. Unions are supposed to fix this thing, aren't they? I mean, that's what they're for, right? They're not just, for funneling money to any political party from the people that pay to be in the union. Obviously, they're supposed to protect the workers. Well, Hollywood shouldn't have any problem. Like you can't make a movie without bowing to the Screen Actors Guild. So why do they have this problem? They have a union. It's almost as if unions don't do what they say they do.
Oh, I think this whole thing is just empty. Like it's just an empty virtue signal in general. By the way, Rapinoe, I watched her make an appearance on Rachel Maddow, and I swear to God, she looks like a legendary skin for Rachel Maddow. Do you guys see what I'm talking about?
Yes. Rachel Maddow.
I'll be able to get that out of my head now.
Alternate universe Rachel Maddow.
Yeah,
I've also heard she looks a lot like Anderson Cooper.
Oh God, yeah, she does.
Gender bent Anderson Cooper.
I just had to say that.
God.
She just
it's kind of a shame though, because I don't know if you saw the Playboy spread she did, or some modeling at GQ. I don't know.
No.
She cut. She carved out of wood.
Well, I'm sure.
I still can't get over the fact that, like I said, she's got that Anderson Cooper face.
Well, I wouldn't want to be up close and piss her off because she might kick me. I mean, she is an athlete, but I still think that if they want this, they should have to play them in for it.
Absolutely.
If they win the match, then they should get what they want. If they lose the match,
for
then
all the marbles. Let's do it.
Yeah. There we go.
Let's pay-per-view that shit.
Then they can maybe negotiate and go under the same contract as the men, where they only get paid if they play, and if they're not called for training camp, they don't get paid, but they're still on contract. So,
yeah, I don't know. This is just it's absolutely empty virtue signaling on the part of Andrew Cuomo. He knows that this has been it's been illegal to do that since 1963. It's just he is certain that the soccer team, the female soccer team, the women's league, the entire audience, everyone that he's pandering to, all of New York, he thinks that they're stupid, and if they're sitting there clapping for something that already exists, then they're proving him right. So
more often than not, the politicians are just part of the stupid people. It's the spin doctors telling them what to say, and they just never question what to say. And even the spin doctors probably don't even register the 63 Act. They just make themselves forget it for the sake of telling the politician what the politician needs to hear, and the politician hears all they need to hear, and they repeat it. I don't think it's very possible that no one in this whole system is being actively sort of just knowingly lying. They've all just climbed into the same narrative. You know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know if I can be on board that he's just a stupid normie thing, because this is really strategic, because he's coming on top. He's trying to, at least. I'm not saying he has a good chance or anything, but he wants to be in on that 2020 presidential bid.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
This is
pandering,
really good timing for
you
that.
You gotta understand. The voters who put people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in office, right? That's 4% of the eligible voters in her area of New York. That's basically like all that voted. Just a tiny percentage of the people who could vote. Those are the people they're pandering to because they're the ones that's going to go out and vote. They're the ones that are going to determine who wins that area. And so he's going to do stuff like this, even though it's completely meaningless, even though it's just copying existing law, even though nothing is going to change because of it. He's going to do stuff like this because those people will be like, "Oh, that's what we wanted to see. We're going to vote for that guy," and because he gets good press out of it, and he'll pander to that set of people all over the country, which could win him California if he does enough other things that makes them happy.
Yeah. And for the record, politicians all over the political spectrum pander to women. They all, on some level, some are way more obvious about it, like Andrew Cuomo here and a lot of Democrats, but they all do on some level because they know that the woman vote, that's like everything. That's like that's probably the most important vote to get.
They're pandering to gynocentrism because you have the gynocentric women's vote and the gynocentric men's vote.
Yes, you have the men that will vote for the women. Yes.
Yeah, and there are not enough women who are not gynocentric to matter to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of ironic. Like, who's more defensive of women, men or women? It's men, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
in a lot of situations, yeah, in a lot of situations, it's harder to convince men to look at a woman's violence against a man that starts a serious conflict that predicates injury, basically, of her when he defends himself or when he snaps, like a woman's sustained long-term violence, and see it as equal or greater than that one act that ends up injuring her. They'll still condemn the man for that, regardless of the circumstances. Their gynocentric men, white knights, will still condemn the man for that. And it's women who do it are just blind because they are solipsistic. Men who do it are blind because they're not thinking of the situation. They're thinking of somebody hitting their mother or their sister or their daughter or their wife, and how they would never want to do that. They wouldn't want anybody to think they would do that. And they've been raised to have a revulsion toward violence against women, right? Toward any act of violence against women, to be very protective of women. And so it's a bigger blind spot for them. And you can yank somebody out of their solipsism a little easier than you can yank somebody out of a social taboo, out of recognizing and being somewhat slave to a social taboo. So yeah, men can be more gynocentric than women under certain conditions.
Well, yeah, there are more male feminists than there are female MRAs, and I don't mean like one for one. I mean like in proportion, because there are way more men that are willing to go to bat for women than women that are willing to go to bat for men, which is why the ones that do we find so shocking, and a lot of people are attracted to that. Like, a lot of men are like, wow, this woman's going to bat for me. That just doesn't happen that often.
Although, yeah, I run into as many male feminists as I do female feminists, actually.
Oh no, I was talking about just in terms of like men who are feminists versus women who are MRAs.
Well, and you have men who are. I don't run into as many women who are MRAs as I do men who are MRAs.
Sure.
If you go to a convention or a gathering, it's mostly men.
Yeah.
And with a handful of women. But if you look around feminism, it's like it's half men. And then you also, and they're not the only gynocentrists, they're just the most overt gynocentrists. Traditionalists have a level of gynocentrism as well. And while it is less dysfunctional, and it has its functionality in terms of how to maintain a community, and how to maintain community safety, and basically the hierarchy of who protects whom with children at the most protected level, so that a man knows if he's protecting his community and his home and he fails to stop the threat, the women are going to be there to protect the children, and to take care of the children. there's that level of historical functionality, but there's still the dysfunction of holding women less accountable. Like the biggest aspect of gynocentrism, the biggest threat to men in gynocentrism is the accountability gap. I've said this a bunch of times and I'll say it again. Everything that we talk about, every men's issue that you can think of, is affected in some way or another by the accountability gap.
All right, my dogs are barking. I'm sorry. I don't know what they're barking at.
Where I come from, that means your feet hurt.
Oh no, my feet don't hurt, but my dogs are barking. Let's.
Where did that come from? Did some dude have dogs for feet one day?
It could happen. It sounds like something that you'd see on Monty Python, though. All right, so we got one last story. Let us know what you guys think about these stories. Oh, I got another super chat. It's Charles. He has one more comment about child labor. $5, he said. This was like a little while ago, though. Was thinking primarily of the way the West pushes child labor laws in desperately poor countries. Ah, I see. Okay. Well, thank you for that comment. So let's move on.
I gotta add something to that because the West does something even worse than that. The West creates the conditions that push these countries into using child labor to produce goods that are sold here in the West, and then pushes child labor laws on third world countries. Look up the production of chocolate, for instance, and you'll never look at chocolate the same.
I don't want to do that. I like chocolate.
It's made from Black Lives Matter.
Speaking of Black Lives Matter, let's move on to the next story. Let us know what you guys think about this story of Andrew Cuomo and him finally bringing equality to New York in the comments section. All right, so Mike J.
Yes, sir. We get to end with a bit of a funny, still kind of sad, but a bit of a funny. For many months, it's been debated who the new James Bond should be played by in the next installment, the 007 film franchise. Many progressives have championed the idea of a black or female James Bond. And in a shock to all fans, feminist screenwriter Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who will be assisting in writing the script for the next movie, announced that the next 007 will be both. British actress Lashana Lynch, best known for her role in Captain Marvel, will be the star of the upcoming yet-to-be-named 25th Bond film. An anonymous movie insider, so this is no longer Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but this is someone else. An anonymous movie insider tells us that while Daniel Craig will still be in the movie and will still hold the moniker of James Bond, Lynch will be the star of the show and hold the title 007. The source adds, quote, "This is a Bond for the modern era who will appeal to a younger generation while sticking true to what we all expect in a James Bond film. There are spectacular chase sequences and fights, and Bond is still Bond, but he's having to learn to deal with the world of #MeToo. That's what we all want in a Bond movie, right?
I was okay with this right up until that moment. Even there's only one sentence left. Finish it.
Bond 25 is set to be released April 8th, 2020 in the US.
Yeah, in a way, it's a bit like the Doctor Who thing. This is the kind of character where this is kind of allowed in the law because, as it says, she's not James Bond, she's 007, and 007 is just a title. So yeah, fair enough. In fact, this is the explanation people give for why 007 was Sean Connery and then George Lazenby and then Roger Moore and then because different people even can have the name James Bond, not just 007. But that's not official law, or is it? I don't know. Can different agents have the name James Bond?
No, my understanding is
there's a fan theory.
Yeah.
That James Bond, as well as 007, is simply a code name, and that's why he changes appearance throughout the years. But again, that's completely just a fan theory. It's not official.
I think
so all the more so, this is like the Doctor Who thing. Yeah, sure, I suppose you can have a woman. Let's see how well it goes.
Well, it's a difference between having a woman and making her a minority for the sake of tokenism versus for the sake of the story. And when it's done for the sake of the story, when it's actually got a point other than tokenism, and the character is well written and the story is well written, people wouldn't object to that. People wouldn't care. They would be like, "Oh, this is a new development. You know, it's shaking things up." And people might there might be some people who would object, but there would be a lot fewer people who would get upset about it than if you come out and shove it in everybody's face and you turn it into a function of tokenism where it's not because you have this great story idea for a black female James Bond or a black female 007, you know, that throws the story for a loop and all that stuff. No, it's because it's time to have a black woman in there. And that's completely different, and it's not good writing. It doesn't better things. It actually takes people, like jades people in terms of, you know, like, oh great, well now we've got social justice in our James Bond. And it's dumb to do that. And they really taking the approach of, you have to like this because if you don't, you're sexist and racist, right? Taking the approach, it's time to you know, it's outdated to like men, and it's outdated for spies to be masculine and in particular hyper masculine and all. It's outdated for movies to be about this guy. So now we're going to push him aside to make room for this social justice token. That's not entertaining. And in the end, at the utmost character of the situation, this is about entertainment, not politics. Movies are about entertainment, not politics. Politics can be inserted into them when it's done subtly and organically, and it tells a compelling story and communicates a compelling message to people. But this isn't compelling. It's not organic. And it's going to fail just like it has every time they have inserted tokenism and politics, social justice into other areas of entertainment, into other movies, into games, into music, into everything. And then they're going to turn around and say, you guys are all racist and sexist because you didn't like this.
That's what they're going to do.
And they're going to be wrong.
Well, here's an interesting little aside here. I think I know exactly why they're doing this, because this came with another article that was here. Apparently, the shooting of Bond 25 has been a fucking nightmare. They've had to swap directors at least once, as far as I've heard, maybe twice. Daniel Craig was injured for a good chunk of the filming. They had to like CGI his face onto a stuntman for a number of scenes. And there have just been accidents on set. Like I think it was something like 3 unplanned on-set explosions.
Oh, geez.
And you've also had a couple of other big A-listers who were set to be in the movie just being like, fuck this shit, I'm walking out of here. So they might be doing this. They might be going with this really radical change to things to try to drum up that controversy, drum up the wow, this is something really crazy and unique and radical. Might as well go see what they're doing just for the spectacle of it, because they know this one's probably not going to be the best.
Well, considering all the problems on set, it's likely going to be a trash fire, just on principle. And
yeah,
here's the thing: the 007 moniker. If you read Ian Fleming's books, and there's actually a few books that never got adapted to movies. I don't know why no one's even bothered to like look into that, even though there have been a shit ton of Bond films. They establish in the lore, and like whether or not you think lore is important, I guess, because we are talking about fiction, I get it. But one of the reasons why this really bugs me is a lot of people dismiss this out of hand because either they're not fans of the Bond movies, It's fair enough. I don't think that, anyone has to be, or they don't think it's very important to them, or they, do this thing where they say, well, it's just a number, 00, as long as she's not calling herself Jane Bond, and they're literally trying to convince us that this is the same guy. Now, in the past, the reason why they changed actors was because a lot of the time they were like, I don't want to do this anymore, or they got too old. I mean, there was even a period there, I think it was either an overlap between the Roger Moore and the Sean Connery, where Sean Connery made a film that wasn't specifically called James Bond, but because it wasn't made by the same studio, but everyone knew it was a James Bond film basically, and like Roger Moore was like doing his movies. I think it was around the time that he started, but I'm not entirely positive about that. But like people like know that this is supposed to be the same guy by and large, and that fan theory is just not correct, because in the lore that was established by Ian Fleming, these are the adventures of the same guy, and they change actors because we're talking like a long history of films. Like, you got to change guys at some point, and so they've done it. And I guess it just became a thing to do in Hollywood, where they were just like, well, let's get who's the new hot guy? Okay, Timothy Dalton, let's get him, because Roger Moore's not like doing as well as he used to, and then that the Dalton movies didn't do well, so they took a long break, and then they brought in Pierce Brosnan, who they originally were going to have on a while back, but he had like a contract to do another show, and so they waited a bit, and then they brought him on, and so on, and then and every time they changed Bonds, people had criticisms because they wanted to see the same guy. But in this particular case, this isn't trying to replace, like, they're not just replacing the character, they're actually with a different actor, but it's the same guy, and they're trying to get all the actors to sort of still capture the spirit of the James Bond character, even though each Bond actor has put their own little spin on it, because they want to make their mark, and that's fair enough. But this is actually like completely different. And here's a bit, this is, I thought, was pretty interesting, but also eye-roll worthy. There's another quote from this article where they were interviewing one of the people involved with the film. And I think, to Mike J's credit, they're likely doing this to drum up not just controversy, so that people get to talking about this drastic change they did, because it worked for Fantastic Four, and it worked for all these Disney movies, where they've like cast people that people thought were odd choices, or they did like the Black Little Mermaid. No, people don't want to shut up about that, for example. So I know that it's effective, and they feel good about themselves because they think that what they're doing is progressive and it's good, and this is where we should go. In fact, Daniel Craig is the one who he's the one who brought this writer on board, who is a radical feminist, that like made these changes. And naturally, this is right where she went. She went full bell hooks, and put in a black woman. I'm surprised she wasn't a disabled Muslim, but maybe in the next movie they'll do that. They'll make more progress.
By the way, James Bond's supposed to be English, but no one's ever complained that Sean Connery was Scottish, and George Lazenby was Australian, and Tim Dalton was Welsh, and Pierce Brosnan's Irish. No one ever really cared.
We never found a real English guy.
In it.
It's all non-American to us.
Yeah, it's sort of hardly surprising that the only sort of British action hero everyone knows about would be the first on the chopping block, because we were the first ones to outlaw slavery and whatnot. Did you see that article I sent you? No. It was less than a year ago when it was in the news that Barbara Broccoli, the daughter, I think, of Cubby Broccoli, as in, I think the closest person who can own it, sort of came out publicly saying there will never be a female James Bond. And I guess they got around it with semantics. Yeah, but there'll be a female 007.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a lot of people accept, and I guess this is what I don't accept, because you think that maybe on a technicality you didn't change James Bond because he's in the movie, but now it's a little bit worse, because first of all, the 007s, the double O's, were a very elite, according to the lore, elite agents of MI6 that were basically the blunt instruments of of the government, right? And they didn't get replaced easily. Like, it's almost like Michael Jordan's number is 23 on the Chicago Bulls. When he retired, they retired his number 2. That's sort of like how that is supposed to work. When Alec Trevelyan died, who was 006 in the movie GoldenEye, one of my favorite Bond movies, you didn't see any more 006s because that was the guy. He's gone now, right? And so that's the one thing. Another thing is, I was getting to this quote that this person in the interview, they said that Bond meets this woman, the James Bond, played by Daniel Craig, who I never thought was a great Bond, but he was okay. He says there's a pivotal scene in the start of the film where M, who they replaced, that used to be a man originally, and then they replaced him with Judi Dench, and then again Judi Dench left because I think that she was just like, I'm not going to make these movies forever. So they brought in Ralph Fiennes, calls him back in desperation to tackle a new global crisis. There's a pivotal scene where she walks in, and it turns out it's a black, beautiful woman. It's a popcorn dropping moment, but then they just told us about it. So really, is it? Bond is still Bond, but he's been replaced as 007 by this stunning woman. Bond, of course, is sexually attracted to the new female 007 because he can't resist, I guess, and tries his usual seduction tricks, but is baffled when they don't work on a brilliant young black Wammen who basically rolls her eyes at him and has no interest in jumping into his bed. Well, certainly not at the beginning. So, like, they do this, I just know it's gonna be super cringe. Like, he's going to basically try to put his moves on her, but, Bond doesn't know that this is the era of Me Too, and she doesn't put up with that shit, because she's strong and independent, and she will rebuke his advances. And it's just kind of, it comes across as so petty and silly, and they miss the spirit. The Bond movies are like, or the stories, because I think a lot of the movies, there's a lot of bad Bond movies, okay? But my mother was a huge fan, or is a huge fan of these movies. And back when I was little, I had this memory on television before people had cable, and before the internet and before VCRs and all that. The only way you could watch movies was you either went to the theater or you waited until they aired them on television with lots of commercial breaks. And we used to watch this thing we had this thing that we always do together called the Sunday Night Movie. And on the Sunday Night Movie, there'd be a period where they would do like a James Bond marathon. Not in a marathon insofar as they play all the movies in one day, because holy shit, who's got time for that? But rather, like, every weekend, they play a different Bond film. And so my mom loved the character. Like, the James Bond movies are very popular with women. They like the character of Bond. It's like, it's not just attractive to men. And so we would all gather around the television and watch James Bond movies. Even though we knew, like, we've seen them before, we knew how they were going to end, whatever. And ultimately, what made them popular was that they were fun, and they were just like pulp stories, which is what they were. So compare it to, say, Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones movies are also based on pulp stories. If you replace Indiana Jones, which, by the way, they tried to do with the Crystal Skull, they were trying to, like, pass the torch on to, what's his name? Who's the guy of the Holes guy?
Actual cannibal Shia LaBeouf. Actual cannibal.
Yeah. They wanted to make him the new one because obviously Harrison Ford was getting up there. People didn't respond well. I mean, the movie was just bad anyway, but, like, nonetheless, they wouldn't have accepted it because pulp stories usually revolve around, like, the adventures. Oh, go ahead.
I think George Lucas wanted it to be a daughter instead. I don't know if that was a different point in the script editing process, but imagine how worse that movie could have been if they all just did what George Lucas wanted.
Well, exactly. But the thing about pulp stories is, and this is something that I think Hollywood they don't know about. They don't remember anymore. There's a reason why none of the Bond movies need to be watched in order. Like, literally none of them. You can just pick up one at random and watch it because they are self-contained films. There's no arc. There's not necessary. There is within the film itself, but they're not telling a bigger story. There's no James Bond, expanded universe. The closest thing they get to it is, I think Jaws appears in, like, a few of them. And so like he has an arc, which is really strange, but those movies got pretty cringe anyways. But like aside from that,
Moonraker was the best and worst Bond movie at the same time.
Yeah. But like the point is that, you know, they are missing the mark in the spirit of not just the characters, but the film as a whole, and they're throwing out the canon, and they're doing it in a really clever way that most people are going to give a pass to, because they think, you know, like I said before, they either say, well, you know, it's just a number, it's not important. No, it is. Read Ian Fleming's books if you care, or look into it a little bit more. He had something in mind. He was trying to create something that was on par with pulp stories of the time, like The Shadow. And he wanted to do his own version of it. And so he created the super spy pulp genre, that they were supposed to be these fun stories, very popular with Playboy magazine and Hugh Hefner and stuff. And obviously they made an enormous pop culture icon out of it. And they're trying to they're trying to cash in on that icon, even if the reasons for it could be because of all the trouble they've had on set. And I would also argue, I want to add something else, and I know that I'm like taking up a lot of the floor here, but I would also argue that well, what was I gonna say? There was something else. It was shit, it's gone. I wanted to say something else and I can't remember now. God damn it. Well, anyway, my point is that, you know, I think that this is, oh yeah, here's the thing I wanted to say, something else. If you were the kind of person who said, I was never a big fan of these movies anyway, or they've been going downhill. Oh, that was the thing I was going to say. I would argue that they've been, the one reason why there've been so many bad ones is because on some level, this kind of political messaging has been creeping in, especially the feminist stuff, into the Bond movies for a long time. Because they've been, if you look at, let's put it this way, watch a Sean Connery movie, like one of the earliest ones, and look at how he treats women in those movies. And don't say it's just because it was the 60s, because it's not that simple. And then look at Daniel Craig in his last movie. And notice how much different he is. And that's been like a slow process. I remember in GoldenEye, the James Bond character is accused of being a misogynist by his boss, right? He ends up proving her wrong and saving the day, but she has to get her digs in. This is something that's been going on for a while. And I can guarantee you that Ian Fleming's work doesn't have any of that shit in it, because he wanted to tell a fun story that just had a lot of awesome stuff in it, and didn't really think about how women were being treated and like all of are they sending the wrong messages? Are they in support of Nazis? He didn't do any of that. He was just like, what would be cool? Okay, you know, I'm going to put this in the movie.
Maybe he did do a little bit of market research and found out that women love that James Bond smacks women on the arse, especially when he's Sean Connery. He could do that all day long and shit like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that would be successful market research, because that is a good point. Women get excited about dominant men. I mean, that's why 50 Shades of Grey outsold so many other books. There's no other explanation for that except that women get turned on by what's in that book. Because the little bit of writing I've seen from it is absolute shit. Like, I would be pulling my hair out trying to read the entire thing, just because I'd be going through wanting to make corrections, edit it. You know, this could be worded better. That could be worded better. Holy shit, the grammar. Holy shit, the punctuation. This is insane. Who published this in this condition? What's wrong with these people? You know, but yeah, the idea that it's misogynistic to portray a hyper masculine man when in fact women, you know, that gets their panties wet. It's just dumb.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to point out in relation to this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I think about, because my friends and I, in fact, something my husband and I kind of bond over, no pun intended, is watching older movies that are of like the B movie genre and below. And when I say and below, I mean there are films that, you know, you go and you look up B movies, you'll see a lot of, you know, stuff that was made in the 50s and the 60s, somewhat in the 70s and 80s, you know, where there's a giant animal or a giant bug or a brain that's no longer in a head. It's like in a jar of liquid that happens to have developed bizarre psychic powers, or stuff like that. It's old B movies. And of course, there's all the Tromaville stuff, and there's things like the sleepaway camp movies and the various zombie movies that are out there. And love that stuff, right? Love the old takes on different movie monsters, Frankenstein and Dracula and all that, and all the different movies that had vampires and undead and were creatures and stuff like that. But then there are movies that are actually a level below that. And further, like we watched a movie once that the title of the movie was Butt Crack. And
sounds
it
like
was
something.
hilarious. It was a great movie.
Wait, is that the movie that they featured in Idiocracy that everybody was watching in that future, where there was just like an ass on the screen?
No.
Okay.
This movie, the guy, it has one zombie, and he's so socially unaware that he doesn't realize he's a dead zombie. He thinks, that he's with his friends and everything, it's a strange movie. You almost have to watch it, but like, the legend is you say his name 10 or 12 times in a sentence and he'll come back, and the girl goes off about what a dumb legend that is. And in the course of her tirade on what a dumb legend that is, she says she does the thing and he comes back. So I mean, there's movies like that. Zombievers is another one. Movies that, even Joe Bob Briggs wouldn't have showed them on his show. And counted up the number of boobs and so on. But there's a new genre now that's even worse than all of those. You might have, the B movies that were fun to watch. You might have C and D movies that were of a lower quality and that were so amateurish that you have to laugh as much at how amateurish the film is as you do at enjoy the story and everything. And they all still had at least some level of, you want to see what's going to happen next, right? But now we have F movies. F movies are the insertion of feminist social engineering into these films. And 20 or 30 years from now, when we've gotten over all of this shit, there are going to be people that are going to collect and watch F movies just to laugh at the cringe, count up how, drink a shot every time, somebody says misogynist or do
fair,
a shot every time.
We already are making fun of them.
Like, we're making fun of them, but not like you do, not like riff tracks, right? Not like Mystery Science Theater 3000. F movies, complete and utter failures. That are failures because
holy shit, Hannah.
Social justice was
Hannah, let me introduce you guys to these guys called EFAP later.
Holy shit. Hannah, you just gave me an idea. The EFAP guys don't even do this. Why don't we do riff tracks of these feminist films?
Oh my God, that would be great. I would go in for that. I would love that. That would be great.
Coming to an ICMI near you.
Oh, I mean, that would be like, it'd be so obvious, and we wouldn't be able to pause. We just have to like go while it's running. None of this, banana bullshit. We basically just record it, and like, I don't know how to do this, but I think that has to happen on some level. And by the way, you notice that feminists only do this with like gigantic multi-million-dollar blockbuster films. They're never going to try to do, they're not going to try and like replace the main character of Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus Hurricane or whatever. They're not going to try to, replace the main character in a fucking like, what was that? I said Birdemic or Rubber or any other really, really bad movie that people, watch for the lulls. And I mean, part of me is glad about that. Like those movies, like they have their place in the universe. But yeah. So, anyways, I guess the last thing. Well, is there anything else anyone wants to say about this Bond bullshit? If not, then
do you expect me to talk?
Oh, by the way, Mike, since you're talking, you said that there is Daniel Craig British?
I don't know. I might have to look that up.
They're
all British apart from the Australian
English. I'm sorry, English.
Yeah. I think he might be.
So he's the first. He might be the first English guy to play Bond.
Yeah, but as I've often said, genetically, there's no
Daniel Craig, born March 2nd, 1968, Chester, United Kingdom.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
What about Roger Moore again? Where is he from?
I think he was Welsh. Or
Roger Moore?
Tim Dalton may have actually been English. Now I think.
Born Stockwell, London, United Kingdom. Roger Moore.
Oh, Roger Moore is the first British Bond. Then okay, so they did get that. They did get that done. Okay, good. All right, that was basically what I want to know.
You can be born in London and still be Welsh. The Welsh are a bit weird about this. You don't even need a Welsh accent to be Welsh. You just need Welsh parents.
There you go.
Yeah.
Today I learned.
Oh, that was something I didn't know before. Well, anyway, let us know what you guys think about this. The last thing I did want to say about this is, if you guys come across people that, if you're talking about this, and I know you're going to see it because I did, where someone who's even in I was in a Facebook group that's concerned about, they talk about this stuff, whether it's mostly in gaming, but also in films and comics and all this other stuff. And when this came out, there were a number of people who were like, they didn't care. And their reasoning behind it wasn't like the sort of logical ones that we talked about, but rather because they just don't like these movies. Well, you should let them know that, this is going to keep happening with everything that has any level of popularity to it. So what I said was, well, you know what? I'm glad that you don't have to like it. But the thing is that inevitably this is going to happen to something that you do like. And when it does, you don't ask me for sympathy. I mean, obviously I'm still going to have sympathy, but basically this franchise is probably going to die because of this. So just watch Mission Impossible movies. All right. Well, anyway, with that said, we're going to wrap up the show. I want to thank you guys for coming on the HBR News Show. Please, if you can, consider going to the Feed the Badger. We are almost at our goal to make this the best ICMI ever. And also you can, use this opportunity to sponsor a specific speaker. So if there's a specific speaker that you want to buy a coffee for or whatever, then you can support them. Go to the same place. It's just on feedthebadger.com. So I want to thank Hannah, Mike J, and Dr. Ranamercam for coming on today's episode of HBR News. I want to thank you guys for coming and watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and leave us a comment about any or all of the stories that we discussed today. With that said, this has been HBR News, and I have been your host, Brian. Thank you so much for coming on, and I'll talk to you guys next time.